The Zarvine dynasty had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 900 star systems, and their word was law in every corner of known space. The other species bowed before them, paid tribute to their golden thrones, and whispered prayers to their ancient rulers. The Zarvine believed themselves eternal. They believed no force in the universe could challenge their dominion. They were wrong. Emperor Kalthos VII sat upon his throne made of compressed neutron star matter. His silver skin reflected the light of 1,000 holographic displays showing his vast empire. Around him stood his council of advisors, ancient beings who had served the dynasty for centuries. They were discussing the usual matters of state when a young messenger rushed into the chamber with fear in his 6 eyes. The messenger fell to his knees and pressed his forehead to the cold floor. He spoke of a disturbance in the outer rim. A species called humans had begun expanding beyond their small corner of space. They were building ships. They were forming alliances with lesser species. They were asking questions about the dynasty's authority. Emperor Kalthos laughed. The sound echoed through his grand chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. He had heard of humans before. They were a young species, barely 500 years into their space age. They lived short lives and bred quickly like vermin. Their technology was primitive compared to the glory of the Zarvine. What threat could such creatures possibly pose? He dismissed the messenger and returned to more important matters. This was his first mistake. 300 light years away, Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the flagship Unconquered Spirit. She was 62 years old with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen more battles than most species lived years. Behind her, through the massive viewport, floated the assembled might of humanity's first Imperial fleet. 2,000 warships hung in the darkness between stars, their hulls painted black as space itself. Sarah had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Her grandmother had died in a Zarvine raid that killed millions. Her father had worked himself to death in the mines that produced tribute for the dynasty. She had watched her species bow and scrape before alien masters for generations. Now, finally, humanity was ready to rise. The humans had been clever. They had hidden their true progress from the dynasty's watching eyes. While paying tribute, they had secretly built shipyards in hidden asteroid belts. While bowing before Zarvine governors, they had developed new weapons that the galaxy had never seen. While pretending to be weak, they had forged alliances with a dozen oppressed species who were ready to fight. Sarah turned to face her bridge crew. These were the finest minds humanity had produced. Engineers who had invented engines that could outrun Zarvine ships. Tacticians who had studied every battle the dynasty had ever fought. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this war. She nodded once, and the order was given. The first Imperial fleet jumped into hyperspace, leaving trails of blue fire across the cosmos. The first target was the Zarvine outpost at Thurin 7. It was a mining colony with a small garrison, chosen specifically because the dynasty would not expect an attack there. When the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, the Zarvine defenders barely had time to raise their shields before the assault began. Human weapons were different from anything the galaxy had seen before. While most species used energy weapons that could be blocked by standard shields, humans had developed projectile systems that fired slugs of compressed matter at near light speed. These kinetic bombardments tore through Zarvine shields like paper. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Not a single human ship was lost. News of the attack spread across the Empire like wildfire. The Zarvine Council demanded an immediate response. Emperor Kalthos finally began to take the human threat seriously, but his arrogance had not faded completely. He ordered the Third Fleet, a force of 500 warships, to crush the rebellion and bring him human prisoners for public execution. Admiral Chun was waiting for them. The Battle of Nexus Point became legendary across the galaxy. The Zarvine fleet outnumbered the humans 2-1, and their ships were larger and more powerful by any standard measure. But humans had learned a secret that the ancient dynasty had forgotten over millennia of easy dominance. War was not about power alone. It was about will. The human fleet used tactics that the Zarvine had never encountered. Instead of forming battle lines like civilized species, the human ships scattered and regrouped in unpredictable patterns. They used asteroids as cover. They launched fighters that swarmed like angry insects. They deployed nuclear mines that detonated in waves of deadly radiation. They refused to fight fair. The Zarvine commander, a decorated veteran of 100 campaigns, found himself confused and frustrated. Every time he thought he had cornered the human ships, they slipped away and struck from another angle. His proud fleet was being picked apart piece by piece. When the Zarvine finally retreated, they had lost 300 ships. The humans had lost 47. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible became reality. The dynasty could be beaten. Emperor Kalthos felt something he had not experienced in 3 centuries of rule: fear. He called an emergency council meeting and demanded explanations. His advisors had none to give. They had underestimated humanity in every possible way. The humans were not primitive. They were not weak. They were predators who had hidden among prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The emperor ordered the full might of the dynasty's military to assemble. 12,000 warships from across the empire began converging on human space. This would not be a simple punitive expedition. This would be extermination. But humans were not idle. While the dynasty gathered its forces, Admiral Chun led her fleet on a campaign of liberation. She struck Zarvine supply lines and destroyed their fuel depots. She freed enslaved species and armed them with human weapons. She broadcast messages across the galaxy, calling on all who suffered under the dynasty to rise up and fight. And they did. The Crow, a warrior species that had been subjugated for 4,000 years, seized their homeworld in a bloody revolution. The Talari, peaceful beings who had been forced to build Zarvine ships, sabotaged their own factories and fled to join the human fleet. The Vormak, whose entire race had been reduced to servitude, attacked their masters with improvised weapons and raw fury. The dynasty's empire began to crack from within. Emperor Kalthos watched his 1,000-year reign crumble on holographic displays. His advisors urged him to negotiate, to offer the humans concessions, to save what remained of their power. He refused. The Zarvine had never surrendered in 12,000 years. They would not begin now. The final battle took place above Zartho Prime, the homeworld of the dynasty. The emperor had gathered 8,000 warships to defend his capital. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the galaxy. Surely, he thought, this would be enough to crush the human rebellion once and for all. Admiral Chun arrived with 3,000 human ships and 2,000 vessels from allied species. She was outnumbered, but not outmatched. Her crews had been fighting and winning for 2 years. They knew victory. They believed in themselves. And they carried the hopes of 100 enslaved worlds on their shoulders. The battle began at dawn, measured by Zartho Prime's rotation. The dynasty's fleet formed a massive defensive sphere around the planet, their weapons ready to annihilate anything that approached. It was a formation that had won them countless victories over millennia. Sarah Chun smiled when she saw it. The Zarvine were predictable. They had been winning for so long that they had forgotten how to adapt. They expected the humans to charge into their guns and die gloriously. Instead, Sarah ordered her fleet to hold position. For 6 hours, nothing happened. The 2 fleets faced each other across the void, while the Zarvine commanders grew impatient. They began to break formation, sending squadrons forward to engage the enemy. This was exactly what Sarah wanted. The human fleet struck with precision that shocked the galaxy. Small attack groups targeted the Zarvine squadrons, destroying them before they could retreat to the main fleet. Each victory pulled more enemy ships out of position. Each engagement weakened the defensive sphere. Emperor Kalthos screamed orders from his palace, but his commanders could not respond fast enough. Human tactics were too quick, too brutal, too unpredictable. The battle became chaos, and humans thrived in chaos. By nightfall, the dynasty's fleet had lost half its strength. The survivors were scattered and confused. Admiral Chun finally gave the order to advance. The flagship Unconquered Spirit led the charge. Sarah stood on the bridge as her ship punched through the enemy lines, weapons blazing in all directions. Behind her came the full might of humanity's vengeance, a tide of steel and fire that nothing could stop. The Zarvine flagship, a massive vessel that had served emperors for 5,000 years, exploded in a burst of golden light. 2 hours later, the last of the dynasty's defenders surrendered or fled into deep space. Emperor Kalthos VII watched from his throne room as human dropships descended through the atmosphere. His guards abandoned their posts. His advisors fled through secret passages. He sat alone on his throne of neutron star matter, surrounded by the symbols of an empire that no longer existed. When Admiral Chun walked into his chamber, flanked by human marines in powered armor, the emperor did not rise. He stared at this small human woman who had destroyed everything his ancestors had built. She stared back without fear. The emperor asked how this was possible. How could a species so young, so primitive, so short-lived have defeated the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known? Sarah Chun answered with words that would be remembered for centuries. She told him that humans were not special because they lived long or built impressive monuments. They were special because they never stopped fighting. They never accepted defeat. They passed their anger and their hope from generation to generation like a sacred fire. His dynasty had grown comfortable and lazy over millennia, but humans had been struggling and learning and adapting every single day of their existence. The emperor was taken prisoner. His dynasty was dissolved. The empire he had ruled was divided among the species who had fought for their freedom. Humanity did not claim dominion over the galaxy. They claimed partnership. They helped rebuild what the Zarvine had destroyed over 12,000 years of oppression. Admiral Sarah Chung retired to a small house on a green world, far from the battles. She spent her remaining years writing down everything she had learned, so that future generations would never forget. The galaxy had been ruled by tyrants for millennia, but humanity had ended that reign in just 3 years. And on 100 different worlds, children of a dozen different species grew up free. They learned about the humans who had come from a small blue planet to challenge an empire. They learned that tyranny was never permanent, that courage could defeat any enemy, and that the galaxy belonged to those brave enough to fight for it. The Zarvine dynasty had ruled for 12,000 years. The human Imperial fleet had ended their reign. History continued, as it always did, but it was written now by the victors. And for the first time in memory, those victors believed in freedom.